Hello everyone. I wanted to make a follow-up video from my last video on Dean Withers featured on Surrounded by Jubilee, and I got a lot of comments, a lot of interesting funny comments. I got ratio bad, I'm not gonna lie. The most common argument I get is when personhood begins, and they usually like cap it around, consciousness, sentience, 20 to 24 weeks of gestation. And so this video is me refuting that. But before I get into that, I want to define what a person is. My definition of a person is an individual substance with a rational nature. This is quoted directly from Trent Horn in his book Persuasive Pro-Life. He continues this means that a person is a being that is a member of a rational kind. This definition would include human beings that can act like persons, like you and me, as well as human beings who cannot act like persons, like fetuses and infants. This definition is also species neutral, because intelligent aliens and other rational beings, such as angels, would be persons under such a view. The important point to remember is this: even if we can't function rationally, such as when we were infants, we are still members of a valuable kind that deserves respect and protection under the law. And since we've remained members of the humankind throughout our entire existence, it follows that throughout every stage of our existence, we deserve the respect and protection humans normally receive. A pro-choicer would say personhood is at 20 to 24 weeks, and sentience is important because that's when you start to experience things such as sight or pain, like any type of experience where if you terminate it, there was value there to be spared. Prior to that, it doesn't matter. They believe abortion is not immoral but amoral. That's why they think it as permissible. Now, you can argue this many ways. For starters, I usually ask them, when do they believe personhood ends? This is the basis of the argument. They'll usually say certain brain death, and this is when the person has complete cessation of brain functionality permanently. Now, you may ask, why is this relevant? Because a permanent cessation of consciousness doesn't allow humans to experience anything, and this will make their body a corpse, because the brain can no longer sustain the body to survive without artificial intervention permanently. Now, the key word is permanent, and this will be relevant later. Now, pro-life advocates can actually agree that brain death is where personhood and human life ends, but not because of the permanent cessation of sentience or consciousness, but because a human being loses organic unity for the good of the whole. The brain sustains the body, and without it, the body will start to decompose into natural death. Okay, so now that we have their standard of when personhood ends, I have to show why it's inconsistent, and I could do that by outlining how the inverse of when personhood ends is not consistent on when it starts, and it actually supports the pro-life position on when personhood starts. To set this up, we have to look at people who temporarily lose consciousness or sentience when they go comatose or when they faint due to health complications. Putting personhood at consciousness will deny people personhood when they are temporarily unconscious, and thus it's free game to do whatever you want with them in that brief moment, including killing them. Now, the common rebuttal to this is that, well, those people who are unconscious still have the capacity for consciousness and sentience, and thus they still have personhood. Or they would also say they have past experiences that we value, so them temporarily being unconscious, they should still be valued as human beings. To respond to the former, the natural developmental trajectory of the embryo is to grow into a sentient state, and this inherent nature demands respect. The standard of sentience demands an active one, meaning that they have the inherent capability to produce sentience or consciousness as soon as they wake up. The same way a fetus has that same inherent capability, they just have to wake up. To respond to the latter, people who have brain damage and develop dementia like Alzheimer's or have amnesia can lose recollection of their past experiences, yet it would still be wrong to murder them. Now, if your basis is on the family and friends that has had those experiences with them, then I can say that for the unborn fetus. So the main argument is basically, why can't personhood and human life begin at the same time, the same way it ends at the same time? So in regards to brain death, which is the permanent cessation of human consciousness, it ends human life and personhood. If the possibility of future consciousness determines whether the subject exists after death, then why doesn't it also determine when the subject begins to exist before birth? Now, if your counterclaim is future consciousness is necessary for continuing to exist but not sufficient for beginning to exist, then I would argue if the possibility of future consciousness explains why a person continues to exist through periods of unconsciousness, then why doesn't the same principle explain when a person begins to exist? If future consciousness is essential for persistence, then why isn't it equally relevant to origination? Basically, brain death means a person can no longer obtain consciousness anymore. And this is where personhood ends, because it's a permanent state of unconsciousness. But a fetus's unconsciousness is not permanent, it just hasn't happened yet. Kind of like a comatose person. In due time, they will achieve their consciousness, but unlike somebody in a coma, we actually can't pinpoint when they will receive that consciousness. This is the problem with having sentience as a standard for personhood, because it is inconsistent with its inverse from the termination of personhood. Now, another objection to this is that it lacks continuity based on a temporary loss of consciousness. Now, consider this syllogism. If a person can lose sentience and regain it back while still being the same individual, then that means that something other than sentience grounds personal identity. We do regard someone who regains consciousness as the same individual as they were before. Therefore, sentience is not a necessary condition for personhood. The lack of continuity in consciousness means that there is an underlying factor to which we would grant somebody temporarily unconscious personhood. We wouldn't say that the person they were before being under anesthesia is not the same person after they've awakened from anesthesia. And that's because we subconsciously know that sentience or consciousness is not the criteria for personhood, especially since non-human animals don't have personhood despite being sentient. This leads me to my last argument. Sentience alone doesn't grant humans value because animals have sentience. And being that sentience is on a spectrum, humans will still value infants over animals, even though infants have less sentience than a lot of animals like pigs or chimpanzees. We value humans not based on what they can do, but based on what they are. Human. Personhood is completely arbitrary, and it gives room for people in power to subjectively choose when to protect humans instead of something objective, foolproof, and consistent like at the moment of conception. Also, you run into a bunch of issues when it comes to legislating sentience as a criteria for personhood in the context of abortion. But those are the three ways how I would refute the sentience or consciousness criteria for personhood. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I got a lot of pushback on my last video. I'd love to see that. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and God bless.